So tell me more, like, so Lawrence does these classes in the inner runner community on Thursday mornings that are specifically focused on breathing. And you were just saying something about how it's too much for you, and I'm super curious to learn more about that. So tell me how you are experiencing and interpreting the breathing classes that we're doing.
Well, I first realized how important breathing was when we just got the addition of the breathing in the 4 weekly classes we do. I remember the one of the first breathing classes we did a breathing that was intended towards lengthening the psoas muscle. So
Hmm.
you suck, it was the suck and hold. So you suck air into your chest with intention to lengthen and do some kind of an activation that releases tension in the psoas, which is helpful in exhalation. But because the breathing pattern was a trauma response whereby you suck air into your lungs, I actually had like I started shaking and crying really, really uncontrollably. And I'll tell you, I immediately stopped. It was via the recording. I wasn't live. Grabbed my flow rope to Pink Floyd to calm myself down. I was very not okay, very not okay. So that was one of the first times I realized how important breathing was and a big aha as to how much my breathing was really fucked. And consecutively after that, I had a chronic stitch for multiple weeks in that same area where it got kind of aggravated on my lower right side. So I'm realizing now just heightened awareness. Thank God for it. It was kind of like a compass towards where to work on. My breathing is very much here.
Hmm.
And as much as I condone the belly out, relax the stomach instead of the auto recording, we're told to suck our belly button in. It's one thing to say, another thing to do. My breathing is incredibly reciprocal, very much engaged in the protection response of all the time.
So it's
So
still, so how long have you been working on it?
since we started that breathing class, like two
Well,
months.
but so like this is what I'd say. I've been following Lawrence for like 10 years, and I started doing breathing classes with him back in probably 4 years ago. So I don't remember when he went away with it and when he came back, like, right, like I've sort of
Oh,
floated in and out. But my first breathing class with, so what's interesting, and like if we want to riff on this a little bit, like the power of breathing and
yeah.
how, like, I think a lot of people think, oh, we just, we don't need to think about it. You just breathe and it is what it is. And I used to think like that too. And the first time that we did a SOAS release, that I did one with Lawrence in a breathing
Oh,
class, it was the one where like you're laying on your back and you like
yeah.
sort of draw your heel up and then you turn like
I love that one. That one's nice.
okay, well, I had a major trauma response to that one. Like
Wow.
the first time I did it, like first of all, I couldn't physically do the move. Like I couldn't turn my leg, like I couldn't internally rotate at my hip to get my
Oh,
heel up, like on the side. And so I felt I was very physically stuck there. And then when I finally was able to do it and breathe through it, I had a traumatic memory come up, and I wasn't like wailing crying, but it was like a knowing crying. It was like a, and I might even cry right now just thinking about it. It was like a healing crying. It was a, like, I see you, I feel you, I acknowledge you, I accept your pain. I'm sorry that that happened to you kind of pain. And then
oh,
like I was able to let it go. And I sent Lawrence an email afterward and told him, I'm like that, whatever that was incredible. And now I can do that move like absolutely no problem. And I love it. I do it probably 3 times a week, and it's easy now. And so I can't say that, I don't know. I mean, I guess like that would be my question. Like, do you think that there's something to it that is healing, but you have to like go to that place, like you have to let it happen. Like you have to, I guess my experience of it is that when my first exposure to it was like uncomfortable in a way that like if I didn't want to acknowledge like past traumas, I wouldn't have wanted to go there. But then when I went there and just let myself feel that like sadness and pain, then afterward it was like poof, like lighter, better. Is that something that you're like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should let myself do that? Or are you like, oh, hell no, I'm like, where are you in that sort of progression, if that makes sense?
I think it's beautiful. I think this is where trauma and I don't know, the relative and subjective interpretation of it is dose appropriate because I completely agree. It's obviously a part of my body that's asking to be experienced. In that moment, it was way past my nervous system's capacity to tolerate it based on how I was reacting. Like I couldn't breathe. It was like suffocating my throat.
Mhm.
I think I jumped way into the fire instead of dipping my foot in because that one that you're describing, the psoas breathing, I still get a discomfort and icky feeling, but this one with the suck and hold, I was like, I'm not okay. That was like way past. So I definitely think it's a realm for me to explore, but not at that. Like I will not be doing that reciprocal breathing pattern because I think it was too intense. So there's a definitely dose appropriate. And that was like biting off way more than I can chew. I don't know if it's edging back, doing it with someone, or doing a kind of breathing technique that's not as aggravating. But that in and of itself, you know which one I'm talking about, right? Where you suck your tummy in. And I actually wasn't even breathing during it. I was holding my breath the whole time and doing it was like belly pumps
Yeah.
with the breath, like with my mouth and nose closed.
So I love that one. So like, I mean, which is so like this is incredibly fascinating, right? Because like I remember when Lawrence stopped, because it wasn't too long ago that he was like, we're not going to do the suck and holds anymore. And um I and so I remember him doing that and I'm thinking like I trust him and like he always has a reason for things that he does and things that he doesn't do. And I don't know if you saw it, but I wrote in on the message board like, "Hey, help me understand why are we not doing that anymore?" Because personally, like I
Oh,
love that. I feel like when I do like a suck and hold and I get like I pull my diaphragm like all the way up. First of all, having the control of my diaphragm, like I mean, this in and of itself is a huge aha for me to like know where my diaphragm is, to know how to um, control it, or to, you know, to be able to choose where it goes, if it goes up or down. Like that in and of itself is a giant revelation that I didn't used to have access to, and now I do. And I think the suck and holds actually helped me do that. And then, so like when I suck it up all the way in there, and then I make myself really big in the front, like I'll stretch my whole anterior chain out while the diaphragm is sucked up in there, and it just feels to me like it's stretching it in the best way. It's like where I can feel if there's adhesions or whatever in there, and I can just suck it up, and then I let it go. And so for me, it feels really good. And so when I asked him, and he said, "Oh, I found that it can increase anxiety." That I also found interesting because I've had my own issues with anxiety. Like, I mean, I've landed in the ER twice thinking that like I'm having a heart attack, I can't breathe. Like,
wow.
I was really it's very scary, right? When you can't breathe. And that's when your brain will go into like all the fight or flight um reactionary mode. So yeah, I guess if there's anything that maybe gives you hope in that, like
That's
I've
totally
had that anxiety really badly. And I would say for a while, even when I was doing the rounding and arching, I think I did the rounding and arching for probably a year and a half without really using my diaphragm,
wow.
right? Like I was rounding and arching. And then I don't, I can't even say exactly how, like, here's the one thing that like allowed me control over my diaphragm or allowed me to find it. Or I think it was like a series of a whole bunch of things and just being really, really consistent with the breathing. And what allowed me to be consistent with the breath practice was a deep curiosity in understanding that like at some level this breathing stuff is incredibly powerful, and like I don't understand it and I want to understand it better. And so um I can be pretty uh how do you say, like, just when I get curious about something, the way that I will dive into it is like with a full force. I'm like, oh, I like really want to understand this. Like if I can move my hips and my leg in a way that bring back a traumatic memory and make me start crying when I'm laying by myself safe on a living room floor, like it's really telling that our emotions live in our body. And I think that, at least in my case, leaning into that has been my healing journey, and like letting myself go there. And I think that this is again my opinion, and it's, I want to say like it's not informed, right? Like uh it's only my experience. But my experience is that hold on, let me close this.
Yeah,
Wow.
wow, that happened really quick.
That's better. But yeah, my experience has been that the more I let myself go there, it's like reminding myself first that I'm safe, right? Like I'm safe. I'm here on my living room floor. Everything is fine.
Which in and of itself means you're not in the reptile brain. Like to have that kind of higher functioning to take yourself out of the actual fire means that you're in your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah. So here's something, and I'm curious to get your opinion on it. And this is again like me trying to understand the role that breathing plays, the role that movement plays in our ability to emotionally regulate ourselves. So when I first started with Lawrence and he was teaching me about the breathing thing, and like I was practicing the slower breathing and I was recognizing this state of calm, was recognizing a better ability to choose a response to something that is happening versus like react. I mean, I've so many uh examples that I could give of like how I was dysregulated probably all through my teen years, 20s and 30s, maybe even into my 40s. Um, and in so like this journey that I've taken over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in learning how to breathe and learning how to calm myself, I have thought that breathing is at the crux of what it takes to achieve like this current state that I'm in. First of all, I love it, right? Like I love the state that I have found, and I find myself wanting to help other people get there, right? Like, you guys, this is really cool. Like this state I'm in, it's worth it. Like do the thing, let yourself breathe, because it's so good here. And what I have encountered as I've tried to teach people is that, first of all, it's interesting to hear what your experience is, because it helps me to realize that not everybody's experience is like mine, right? Like that we all have our own paths to get to this place. And so it's not as simple as like just breathe low and slow and you'll be fine. Because like the reality is some people like physically can't do it. Like I've been working with people who are like, expand your ribs, and like their ribs are so stuck that they won't expand and contract. And so then I'm like, okay, now I need to figure that part out. And so recently, well, we've heard Lawrence say before um, about how when we start moving and using our posterior chain, that I think his words are like your whole system relaxes and your breathing opens up and like everything gets better. And I have had that experience, but I'm not sure that I really understood it or connected it very well until just recently I heard another like holistic body worker practitioner mobility teacher online, and she was talking about how important it is to get your leg behind you when you're walking, because so she's talking about like hip extension, and you get like your leg behind you when you're walking, and this activates your posterior chain, and that is calming for your whole nervous system. And I was like,
Wow.
what? Like you just said that too, because like, and so here I am connecting dots. Like
Yeah.
Lawrence said that, and then this other woman said that, and I've experienced that. And so it like sparked my curiosity. I'm like, now I need to go into this more. And a lot of it in that, I'd actually be curious to hear if your experience with the flow rope was similar to mine. Like when I first picked up the flow rope, um, I couldn't do it at all. Like I mean, I was just like
Took me
whacking
to
myself with it. And then my initial thought was, this is dumb. That was what a waste of money that was. And I tried it once for like a minute, maybe two. This is dumb. And I don't want to say I threw it, but I might have thrown it like off into the corner. And then I didn't touch it again for a while. And Lawrence kept saying, don't sleep on the flow rope. Like if you're, like do the slow rope, like this is impactful and this helps and blah blah blah. And so at some point, it might have been 2 months later, I finally went and picked it up again. And then I did the whole chopping it forward thing for 2 weeks. Like what he said, he's like, some
And
people will be chopping it forward and you won't even know it. And you'll do that for 2 weeks. And it wasn't until after I had done that for 2 weeks that I heard him say that I was like, oh my God, that's what I'm doing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then when he said, people who are stuck in that pattern where you are anterior chain dominant in your movement patterns, he's like, you're always in a hurry, you're impatient, you're looking for shortcuts, you're not well regulated, and I was like, oh my God, like how did he know? Like that, that's exactly who I was at the time. And I think that's where I'm only just now really putting all this together, that the transformation was getting into my posterior chain, was like giving my brain access to those posterior chain muscles, which it somehow magically worked to just open everything up and to allow me to feel this sense of calm in like a way deeper way than I ever have before. And so then again, hearing that other woman say it too in just a completely separate world, it was like, oh, there is something to this. And now I'm obsessed. Like now I want to know more. And so I'm curious, like, so having said that, where are you in that journey? Or did you do something similar to me, or has your experience been different?
It's yeah, it's interesting, completely relatable. Like everything the above, in terms of me being in the place of wanting to make shortcuts, going quickly, high anxiety without even kind of really realizing it. And now being in a place, still on the spectrum, but kind of parts work where there's parts of me that want one way. Parts of me are so familiar with the protection of anterior chain, which is this kind of concave, heart protecting, not vulnerable position, and parts of me that have intolerance to that contraction, and all they want is extension. So there's funny parts, and I think it's the trauma parts that live in my tissues that come out when it's past the capacity for them to actually realize that the situation is safe when they don't think it is. In a place where if I'm in too much extension, they're like, I think that's what the stitch was about. It was past my capacity. Just although it was the most healthy position, debatable. It's a good position, but maybe not at where I was at. And that's why I think I had that chronic stitch. Like my body, those parts of me that are stuck in that trauma response is like, yeah, we're not ready yet. Despite me wanting so badly when I'm running, I'm like, all I want to do is no, I must dance, that meme. And I know that it's a funny thing because I think it's just a capacity and then slowly dosing it because ultimately that is where the position my body wants to be naturally and gravitates towards. I was chopping down for like 2 weeks, excitedly sending Lawrence a video really frequently, being like, oh my God, I got it. I got it. He's like, yeah, but like the complete opposite. And I'm like, okay, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. It's like, yeah, but like the opposite. So long. And it's interesting to watch people do it. And I'm like, I get it. It's not a muscular, this is a brain thing. So I guess
Yeah.
that's my answer. Like it's dose appropriate. And sometimes people literally are not ready for whatever reason. And maybe despite being like, I know this state feels so good. You guys got to be in it. It's like sometimes it's actually not what they like meditation. Sometimes being still is the least kind of medicine people need if they're so used to a certain way. Like I live in Squamish in BC, really intense athletes of stimulation that want high activation. And I know for my buy-in, slinky spine, breathe is like not happening. Like these are mountain bikers going down like slabs that are like this, or parachuting off the Squamish Chief with a wingsuit. They're not going to want to immediately gravitate towards that. So it's a funny thing. It's just dose appropriate and subjectivity, and I guess meeting people where they're at and where their subconscious is at. Even if they know it's healthy, breathe, breathe, breathe. It's sometimes their body is going to be like, hell no. And breathing through it just isn't the right medicine at the time.
Well, and so that's where I think I'm starting to land, because I don't know, I feel like the breathing thing was, it was working pretty well for me. And then it was just like enhanced times 100 once I got, or it was, yeah, even the breathing got better, but also my mental state got better. My ability to access calm, clear thinking got better once I started getting into my posterior chain. And that
Uh-huh.
was like what Lawrence has said, like when people are stuck with the breathing, right? And like you just can't do it. And I have athletes that I'm working with who are like, I can't get my diaphragm to go down. And so I'm trying to learn and understand about like why is that? And there'll be some practitioners online that are teaching mobility or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, your rib cage is in the wrong position, right? Like it's shifted, and you have this rib flare, and if that's happening, and you're locked here, and then you can't get your diaphragm to work or whatever." So I do think there's something about the stack joint posture, and this is my hypothesis, and the degree to which it's right, like we'll just figure out like as we continue diving through this whole thing, is that our our body systems want to work in a certain way, right? Like it wants to work. Our glutes are supposed to be working, right? Like that, like we're supposed to have hip extension. When when our brains or our nervous system or whatever it is understands that we have access to this movement pattern that it really likes, then that's when like the system can relax. And like that's what I think Lawrence has been trying to communicate with us, is that like learn these movement patterns and then everything else falls into place. And it was that piece that was like, oh, okay. Because I will say, I didn't know it at the time. But when I first got the backwards figure of eight, like, so after my 2 weeks of chopping down, when I first was like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. And then I learned how to do it backwards, and I would practice, one arm at a time, underhand, and then the other hand, underhand. And then I finally got it. I couldn't have verbalized it at the time, but it felt so good to me that I wanted to do it absolutely all the time. Like I became somewhat obsessed with it. And I work from home, which is really convenient for when you're like learning flow rope, right? Because like I would sit at my computer and I would work for an hour or two, and then I would go outside, take my flow rope, and just spend 5 minutes like flowing it backwards. And like that felt so good. And then I would come back inside and work more, and then I would go outside and I would flow it backwards. It took me forever to learn the dragon roll. Like I tried for I don't know how long, but I also would say at the time I didn't have any good educational videos that were really breaking it down. Like
Mm-hmm.
I learned the dragon roll maybe before Lawrence ever did a breakdown video of its drag and roll. Like
Yeah.
once I got that, it was like, oh my God, okay, this isn't that hard, but when you're just watching somebody do it at full speed, it was like my brain could not wrap itself around that movement at all. Like I couldn't even see it, I couldn't visualize it, I couldn't do it. And then the craziest thing is, I don't know how long it took me. It probably took me 2 weeks of trying to learn the dragon roll, not being able to do it, and then and practicing every day, and then just being like, what am I doing? This rope is just like smacking me in the head. And then so I'd say there's two things that help me get it. And so for anyone who maybe is listening to this who is stuck there and can't get it, these are the two things that help me. Number one, laughing at myself when I got it wrong. Like that, and then apply that to any situation we're in. You got something wrong. Isn't that funny? You were trying, you did your best there, and like it still didn't work out. And you can, and like when because this shift was prior to laughing at myself, I was frustrated, and you're a loser. And what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? You're not coordinating, you're right. And so like the response is either we're going to beat ourselves up and tell ourselves how much we suck, in which case, what are we going to do physically? Like, what is our body reaction to that feeling of you suck at this, right? And
Right?
that's me telling myself that I suck at it, or an authority figure somewhere else telling me that I suck at it. Either way, my response is going to be, I'm going to make myself smaller, right? And I'm going to curl up and get more in my anterior chain. So if I'm trying to access a posterior chain, like that's not happening when I'm in a mindset of I'm not good enough. And so like laughing at myself was the first thing. And then the second piece of it was when I was actually able to visualize it. Like it, I've never had an experience like this before. It was creepy crazy and also really cool in that I was laying in bed. I was visualizing myself doing the thing. Like my brain, that was when I realized, oh, this is a brain issue. Like it's a brain coordination thing because once I got it in my brain, I went outside and immediately got it that morning. Like with like no skips or anything. It was just like I picked up the rope, I had it in my head and I went and did it. And I was like, holy crap. Okay, there's something to visualizing. And there's something to being able to laugh at ourselves when we mess up.
Completely. Can I read something?
Yeah.
I texted you this. The sensation which corresponds to the image of ourselves is a chronic muscular tension, which has absolutely no useful function whatsoever. I debate the second part. Maybe not because it's useful, but that's, I think, just it. What happens when you're saying that mental verbiage of, oh my God, you suck, can't do this shit, what are you doing? It's a chronic muscular tension based on an image of ourselves. And it's a sensation.
I'm curious so the second part of that is that the tension has what is it?
No useful function
No
whatsoever.
useful function. Okay, so what is the useful function? Because I'm genuinely curious. What is the
Um,
useful function of tension?
Protection,
And how is that,
pseudo protection.
right? And so I guess, so like, let's go deeper.
Hmm.
How is protecting yourself helping? How is it
There's
useful?
an actual threat, then it literally is protection. Like if there's an actual animal coming, if there's an actual person with a bat coming to help me with a weapon, tension is hard. It protects the organs, it protects the bones, it protects. Being small does protect if there is a threat that's physical coming out from you. And
Does it
yeah,
though? Can I push back on that a little bit? Because even this
yeah,
morning in the class where Lawrence was talking about like how drunk people manage car wrecks,
that was funny.
right?
True.
Or how Taylor Knibb managed her crashes in the Olympics, like when she fell, and that her body was so much like Gumby and it was so relaxed and she wasn't holding excess tension that we break. Like when, so like if someone was coming at us and we're like, and I understand what you're saying, I get it. And like that's my initial reaction or response too, is that like because it's so innate for us to make ourselves tense, I fully hear what you're saying. And I see this other side as well, where you're like, well, wait a minute, is that like a figment of our imagination, or is it something that we've like been taught or we learned somewhere and then we just accept it as truth? But then when you actually examine, is it true? Are we less likely to get hurt when we're holding tension?
I mean, good point. When I roll my, because I was calm as a Hindu cow and it was supple, my body rolled with my ankle instead of tensing and guarding and breaking on the pine cone, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, so genuinely, like, that's what I'm talking about. Like,
Okay.
so given that, like, where is the use and benefit of tension?
I mean, that's the other thing. Like, if there's someone coming to sucker punch me and I punch them back with a tense muscle, I'm gonna have more force than when I was just like,
Fair.
slow pain on you. I don't know. I guess maybe the crux of it is the volition, the choice to have the ability to choose. But then again, sometimes when there is, I don't know. This is a very good question. My brain's kind of going, I don't know. I
Well,
don't
because that's the whole thing. And I think that, like, also, how often in our lives is somebody physically coming to hurt us? And like that could be a very naive statement from me, because like I've never been in a physically abusive relationship with anyone, like, right, like nobody in my family, no significant others, like that's never been a part of my world. So there may be a bit of privilege like in me saying this, that like how often does it happen that another human is physically coming to,
or an animal, like when people are out in the wild. But yeah, I don't know.
even like people out in the wild, like if you were watch two dogs, right? And so there, if two dogs are having, like they're trying to establish dominance, if one of them just rolls over on their back, the instinct of the other dog is like, oh, well, I'm not, that's not a fair
True.
fight anymore, right? So like I'm not gonna, and so the fighting happens when both dogs are fighting for superiority. And so if we look at that and go like, I don't know, is it worth it to like get in the fight to prove that you're superior over that other dog? Or is it like better to just roll over and let it go? And the thing is, like, there's two pieces to that too, where I see it. If all the time you're rolling over and like letting people take advantage of you, like that's obviously no good. I also see a world where I can let shit go, where it might appear to somebody else that I'm rolling over, when the reality is I'm just choosing to not engage because there's no benefit for me in engaging in with that person on that topic, like in that area or whatever. So, um, not being rigid in that case, like being able to let it go serves me very well, and just letting people, like, here's another topic too, and like it sort of relates to this, but like as we alluded to before, like I have so many examples of me flying off the handle and just losing it, right? And just like where I appear calm for months, maybe even years, and then like one day just lose my mind. And it's because like there was all of that I was holding in, holding in, holding in, and that is building up tension more and more and more, and then finally it just explodes, right? Now I feel like I don't do that anymore. And it's not because my life is so easy and there's no shit that ever comes my way. It's more a matter of the things I used to get worked up about, I see in a different light. And I think it's not worth my energy to get worked up about that anymore, right? It's not useful to me. So back to what that quote said, the tension which serves no useful function. And I tell you what, life is so much better when you're able to let shit go. Like just poof, like all the little things. And then you can take a step back and observe other people who I would say are not super well regulated emotionally. Maybe they're not breathing well, they're stuck in anterior. And like what Lawrence has said a lot too, where, like once you've solved a problem for yourself, you can start seeing it in other people. And I would be like, okay, so now I can see when other people are, they're super frustrated and upset because their boss did this or their boss said this or their coworker did that and this, or you know what I mean? Like, right. And like, and it's like, wow, we could really we could let ourselves get super worked up about all that stuff, or you could just let it go.
Totally. There's some things. Can I tell you some thoughts?
Yeah, please.
The first one is the power of, just as one, the power of the nervous system when we're flowing the rope demonstrates itself by our anterior chopping, and how much it actually takes for the brain to download a pattern. If the fight is to kill, not just to play with dogs, if the fight is to kill, the nervous system I mean, this is what Lauren says. A drowning parent will drown their child if they're in that state. So I don't necessarily think it's the situation, it's what happens inside of us. So if the
Yes.
brain is stuck in this of like, I am going to die, the survival instinct, I think that's why for some people, me included, it's very challenging to find that relaxation response because despite it having no useful function, my brain actually thinks it's keeping me alive. And if I don't do it, I will die. So that's where I think the dose is appropriate. And that's where I think the letting go doesn't often work. And it's interesting because the ability to actually analyze and think and talk about these things via discourse is a meaning that we're not in the limbic brainstem. And the
Hmm.
prefrontal cortex develops secondarily to the limbic brain. So if somehow we're stuck in the dorsal vagal, which is the like, we're gonna die, let's fire the missiles, then it's just getting out of it takes, I don't know, the Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine trauma kind of therapy, dose appropriate, pendulating between brain stems, doing it in a safe environment with someone who can co-regulate. But I think often if we're stuck in that pattern, it's a whole other ball game.
So that's really fascinating. You mentioned before that book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Yeah.
Did you
Oh,
ever read that, or have you like looked into it yet?
I've wanted to for forever. I've listened to a couple podcasts, and then Taylor Nibb, I heard in a Ian Ferdino videos reading it. I was like, oh, my girl that I've never met, I want to read it. So no, but I want to.
That's funny. Okay, so like what I heard there, you saying
Yeah.
is that there's benefit to that sympathetic nervous system activation when we're actually in a state of emergency. And
Yeah.
I would 100% agree. I mean, like that's why we have a sympathetic nervous system so that we can react. Like if my daughter is, stuck under a car, like my superwoman strength to lift that car is going to be like so much more than if I'm in my like relaxed state of, rest and digest. Like that's not the state I'm going to be in when I'm actually in a state of emergency. What that book was alluding to, which I,
Oh, did you read it?
yeah,
Oh, wow. You did tell me that. True, 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 true.
yeah. So what that book was alluding to, and we see this in examples with animals all the time. Like I have 4 cats and a dog. My dog is pretty chill. My dog is like not the alpha dog. She's the dog that will roll over on her back and be like, I don't want to fight. I'm alive. Like, but my cats, they're very instinctual. And so what this book is talking about is like the big picture concept is that as humans, what we do is we get exposed to some sort of um, threat or signal or something that activates our sympathetic nervous system and puts us in a fight or flight situation where like I need to react right now so that I can save my own life, so that I can be in survival, I'm safe. And then what we do is we get stuck there and we hold on to that. And then not only do we live there in our heads, but then we go and we tell other people, we might post about it on social media. Years later, we might still be telling the story about like this thing that happened to us because it is still like we are holding on to that potential threat that was threatening to us a year ago, a decade ago, when we were 3, whatever it is, we're still holding on to that. And that in doing so, we're holding this excess tension in our body that physically causes disease, right? So we end up with ulcers, we end up with GI upset stuff, we end up with migraines, we had like it manifests itself in our physiology because we are holding onto it and not letting it go. Now, contrast that to the way that animals function. So it's not like animals are never under threat, right? I have 4 cats. If the neighbor dog comes over, like they're not afraid of my dogs, they know my dog. But if the neighbor dog comes over and they sense a threat, like an energy threat from that dog, like they're going to go into survival mode. And what that looks like is a lot of times, like they'll make themselves bigger, their hair sticks out, their eyes get wide, they do tense up. I mean, for sure. My cat, I've seen and felt them when they are just as tense as they can possibly be. And that is a survival thing. And the minute that threat is gone, the dog is gone, that cat will lay down, roll over, big belly, tension gone, fully relaxed. That cat isn't going to go tell the other cats that, like, oh, did you know that dog came over and did it and almost did this to me and like living in this state of future worry. What if that dog comes back? But what if it comes back? Well, like, look, right now, if we're living in the present moment and we're grounded right now, the dog is not here. And so if I have a healthy nervous system, then when the dog comes, I have an ability to react immediately to save my life. And then when the dog is gone, I have an ability to let that go and live in the present moment where I'm currently safe. And that I would argue a lot of our mental and physical problems come from continuing to hold on to threats from our past that are no longer serving us. And so we hold on to that tension and it lives inside us. And like, I would say that maybe as humans too, we have to choose to actively let it go. Like if the cats just, are able to do it without really worrying about it. Although I think that there's a possibility that you get to a place where you've practiced it so much that it's easy to let go. Okay, this is like, just to make things a little bit lighter. I watched, there's a comedian and she did this little skit about, she goes, so my husband and I are out at dinner. And she said, there was a musician playing or something, and my husband had his back, like toward the musician and wanted to be able to see it. So we asked our waiter, hey, is it okay if my husband moves his chair over here, right? So that we can both be facing this musician and like listening. And the waiter was like, yeah, that's fine. And so they did that. They're sitting closer together. And then later, another waitress, a different one, came up and said, like, oh, you're not allowed to be there. You have to move your chair back. Like you're intruding on, the personal space of the other guy next to you. Like, even though the other guy said it was fine or whatever, but this waitress was like, nope, you need to move it back. And so like this woman is relaying the story and she's like, what a bitch. And she goes, and you know what my husband said? Yeah, that wasn't very nice of her. And then he stopped thinking about it. Right? And like, and the look on her face, because she's a comedian, so she told that story a lot better than I just did. But she had like her mouth open, like, can you even believe that he just stopped thinking about that? Because like, we should be ruminating about that, and we should be telling that story weeks and months later and holding on to what a wench that waitress was. And it's like, how is that serving us now? Right now, is it serving us to think about what a wench that waitress was?
Totally. I mean,
Right. And that's a really minor situation, right? Because like no lives are threatened there. But even I would say, like in the life-threatening situation, like once it's passed, if we choose to hold on to it because we've not chosen to actively let it go, then are we serving ourselves? Like we think we are because we're protecting ourselves from the future threat. But first of all, currently right now, there's no threat. And second of all, if we have a healthy system, if a threat comes at us later, we have the ability to respond immediately.
emotional agility. I completely agree. I think the caveat is that the ability to rationally make that decision, just as exemplified with the challenge of swinging the rope, it's such a deep, it's not just, oh, I'm going to let it slide. Like just as with breathing, I'm not at a place where that actually is healthy for me, despite willing it so. It's the act of, yes, I choose to change. And yes, I accept that maybe it'll be instantaneous. Maybe my nervous system will easily let go. And I have no idea until I actually try and do the somatic work of going inside and desensitizing that inappropriate reaction to a threat that's no longer in my present, that I'm reliving in my persona, in my relationships, subconsciously again and again and again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, having the awareness
It's
like
number
you
one.
have a level of awareness around that, that I think, I suspect that there's a lot of people who are living in the state that you're living in with, I don't want to say no awareness of it, but um like a brick wall, I will not go there,
Well,
right?
because
Like
it's
it's an
so
active decision, like I will not go there. I will not go there. And I wonder, and again, I don't know, but I do wonder the degree to which, like, how do you find a healthy nervous system state when there's a closet that you won't open?
That's a funny one. Bottom up, top down, scorched earth root cause. No idea. Shoot, it's relative perception of that person's safety. It could be cotton candy, it could be a lollipop, it could be like a kitten. I have no idea. It could actually be more. Sometimes Lawrence says it's like, and same with a lot of things, it's you do a harder thing and then that thing becomes easier. Do some burpees, then write your progress report. I don't know. Except burpees, we don't do those things. They're
I know,
stupid.
I'm like, I hate burpees.
What's the point? Yeah, no, let's do some kettlebell swings or something. Let's whatever. But I don't know. That's where I am in the middle of taking or just started. And actually, this conversation's affirming that I will stick with it. I've been in somatic experiencing for a long time with my therapist, the therapy modality with Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine. And we just started a mentorship program for it this year. And I almost didn't want to do it. We only had one session, and I was like, I don't know if this is for me, and that's not enough indication for me to actually know what it's about.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what is it? Can you tell me more about what it is, what you actually do?
So far, I don't know. We meet every Thursday for a couple hours, and there's a group of us, and we basically, from my understanding, I'm going to call one of my friends who's in it, and this is her second year in it, third year. And basically, we bring life to the table with guidance from my therapist, who's has a program for it. I don't know what the syllabus is. We have it online, but I've known her so long. I'm like, I don't know. I'm trusting you. But basically, we bring all our life situations and we work through it in the body and discourse and from a somatic perspective. And the weekly classes are the times when we have a Zoom meeting and we go into different breakout Zooms. But that's all I know so far. And the first one was just a meet and greet. So I'm like, I don't know what to expect. But I know from somatics, it's like what I've been doing. You bring anything you bring is a portal into the body. Like literally just I wait for my therapist to let me entertain her via the story and be like, okay, what's going on in there right now? And she's discussing and inviting me in my body. And honestly, time and time again, I've used this with other people. Where's contraction in your body? Where's expansion in your body? They're like, oh, my boss said this. I have to get groceries later. I'm like, where do you feel that in your tissues? I don't know, like cutting lettuce things. And I'm like, yeah, but in your tissues. And it's fucking so resistant. I'm so resistant. Like we teach what we need to learn. So it's a somatic practice. Like right now, my gut's pretty tense. Right now, I can feel something in my right shoulder here. Right now, I can feel my throat. Like that's literally the soma. And that's where our reactions speak without words. And that's where I think the work is done, where I notice I'm not actually present. I'm so fucking tense. Wow. And I don't even know how to know why. Like I don't even need to know why.
Um, this is gonna sound like this is gonna like come this question's like straight left field. Were you raised with any religious background?
Hmm.
You were?
Hmm.
So something that has come to my attention, because I've run group courses and stuff like that before. And when I'm working with people, and because I'm an athletic coach, right? Like I'm a triathlon coach and I coach endurance sport. And have been doing so for almost 16 years now. So I have seen patterns in people, because I've worked with so many people like over 16 years. You start seeing these patterns. And one of the things that I was trying to help, I say am, something I try to help people do is listen to your body, right? We hear that all the time. Listen to your body. What's your body saying? Like when something hurts and you can hear what it's saying. And there was a phrase that I used. uh, with a woman at one point who I was coaching, where I said, think of your body as your teammate, like, and your job is to set your body up with all the resources it needs, with the environment that it needs, with the mobility that it needs, so that it can perform the way that you want to perform. And the way that she was coming at it is like, no, I dominate my body. I, like it. So she was vulnerable with me in sharing that the idea of listening to your body and being a teammate of your body is so foreign to her. And at the time, I didn't fully understand where she was coming from, or like what her background was, like why this was an issue for her, when like for me, it kind of just really wasn't. Like it was like, I can hear what my body's saying. Just get quiet and breathe. And like you can hear what your body's saying, and then you listen to it. And for her, when she would get a signal from her body, her instinct was to squash that signal down and ignore it and dominate it, because the signals from your body are bad. And then you come to find out that she was raised like Mormon fundamentalist. And I know that I'm not going to just pick on that religion. I think there are a lot of religions that are like, oh, that feeling you're feeling in your body, like you shouldn't feel that. That's bad when you feel that. And it's like, well, guess what? Like we're all humans. Like those feelings are very natural and normal. And it's not bad to listen to like that's my perspective, right? But like um I I think that when our nervous systems are forming, right? When you're like 2 to 8 or 9, and you have authority figures telling you that like the signals you get from your body are sinful and bad, and that you can't listen to those, you can't follow those, your body wants to do this thing but you need to dominate your body, like that sticks with you. And now you're an adult, and even if you're not still wrapped up in that religion, the the teachings of that like still live in you. And so the idea of listen to your body is so foreign, because it's really hard to break that teaching. Does that make sense? I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all? Or you're
It
like,
does. And I can see how ultimately safety and threat and nervous system comes into it. Like it doesn't feel safe because it's not familiar. And further, or like another layer for me, what comes up is the idea of autonomy versus authenticity, Gabor Mate's teaching, whereby if we're in a place where we're traumatized and we show emotion as children with our nervous systems developing, and let's say we cry because something happened, I don't know, we're having an inappropriate tantrum. And the parents, because they're a caregiver, they're like, shut the fuck up. Like, if you don't stop crying, you're not getting dinner. What happens is we suppress our emotions, because if we show emotions, we might not get food, which means we might die. So then again, we downloaded this response of you suppress, deny till you die. If you show this, you could die. So there's no emotions that are like, from one end, it's like, don't show pleasure because that's the devil. And then the other hand, it's like, don't show emotions because then you might not get food. Ultimately, it's the nervous system is like, okay, we'll die if we do this. Shut that down.
mhm. Yeah, and don't show vulnerability, because then you're weak and people take
Yeah.
it you and all of that. Yeah. Um, fully get all that. I think it was a very generational thing. Although it's really interesting to talk. Were you raised in Canada?
Yeah.
So it is interesting to know that it's not just an American thing. It's
No,
funny.
well, and my parents grew up in Poland with the war. So like just
Very,
very Trump, like, yeah, harsh living environment. Anything really that I think gives us the state of fight or flight, the body goes into it.
I think I grew up a lot like that too. I remember my dad saying, like, if I would cry about something as a very young girl, you want
Yeah,
something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm not allowed to show emotion. And like still to this day, I so this is what I'll tell you though, as so after my first trip to the ER, for what I thought was a heart attack, and the doctors are saying it's just anxiety. I mean, I had 4 doctors tell me that I had anxiety before I even like would it, like allow myself to even look into like what is anxiety, right? Like so like I was like super tough. Like if you're looking at like a transformation, like I'm so different than the person I was when I was your age. Like I like literally am just so if that gives you any hope at all, like to be like, oh look, people can transform. Like the person that I was when I was 35 is just absolutely a polar opposite of this person that I am at 50. And all of that shit that I went through was good because it landed me here, like where I am. And you've heard Lawrence say it too, like, this is the most comfortable I've ever been in my own skin. I'm like, yes, I'm there too. Haven't always been there, which should be somewhat, I would hope that it's motivational, knowing that like this is something that can be developed. It's not like, oh, they're just lucky, that they were born into this, like feeling comfortable in their own skin. Um,
Well,
anyway,
like a year and a half into this, since working with Lawrence, a year and a half ago, like I know I'm 33, but a year and a half ago, I woke up and would do 100 burpees.
mhm,
Like even this, the amount of intolerance, my body's not compatible. Like when I'm running, I'm like, my only job is to relax. I breathe first thing. My friend came to Slinky Spine and she's like, that girl a year ago would have never done this.
yeah,
It was yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Related.
The whole thing, like this whole like transformation process of getting out of like that belief that I can't show weakness, I can't show emotion, um, because at some point, the degree to which that comes back and bites you in the ass ends up being some sort of like real low point in your life where now you have a real decision to make, right? So like we can live in that closed state for a long time, and then at some point it manifests itself in our physiology. And so like
Now
for
you're
me,
back. You froze. I don't know why.
oh sorry.
No,
All
no.
right, let me go back to like so what I was saying is that like we can live in that state of being completely closed off, right? Closed off emotions, like where I'm gonna put on this facade of strength when inside I just because I can't show vulnerability or whatever. Um, and then at some point, it manifests itself in our physiology. So and it will be different for different people. Like how it comes out in you will be different from how it came out in me. But like the way it came out in me was like this massive anxiety attack that lands me in the ER, and I'm just sure that I'm having a heart attack. And I was like 48, 47, 46. I don't know. It like several years within the last 4 years, maybe 46. Um, but regardless, like when the doctor came, and so this is the fascinating part too, right? Because like I'm so not going to be vulnerable about this, is that when the doctor came in and told me that there's nothing wrong with my heart and that I'm just having some anxiety, and he gave me some sort of like, I don't know, it must have been like an opioid medicine, whatever it was amazing. I loved it. I mean, like he gave it to me via IV, and it just immediately I was like, oh,
Wow.
like
Can you
that.
imagine if they give out flow ropes instead at the health?
I know, but you couldn't do it. I mean, when I'm in a hospital bed, like being monitored to see if I'm having a heart attack, can you imagine? Like, just flow it backwards.
Is
Like,
it evidence based?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that, so maybe and there you go. So like, there's a choice at this low point that I had. My choice could have been, I love that drug. Give me more of that drug because that drug allowed my brain to like be calm and relaxed in an amazing way. And luckily, my doctor was really vigilant about that. And he's like, you get 5 pills, use them wisely. You will not get a refill on this. And I was like, okay. So I was very careful. And I don't even think I took the last one because I started to get afraid of them. Like I liked them so much that I thought that is scary and I need to be really careful about that. So I need to find another way. And just knowing that that state was available to me, right? Like, so it took a drug at first to show
Mhm.
me that that brain state was available. But when I was able to enter that brain state, like everything was better. So how do I organically enter that brain state? And that was when I had, like I said, I had 4 different doctors tell me that I had anxiety, and I was so against the idea, because it was like, no, that's for weak people. I'm not weak, right? Or like, that's like, I just couldn't identify with that at all because to me it was like a shameful thing. And once I don't even know how I got there, but I got to a place where I was able to calmly open my mind enough to actually read into like what is anxiety. And so this is not somebody else coming at me telling me what it was. This is me choosing to take a step toward it, learn about it. And when I did that quietly on my own, I was like, oh, yeah, that totally describes me. Like all these things. So like what it's saying, what anxiety is, like that describes me to a T. And it was like at that moment where I was like, oh, okay. But I would say what helped me, because now I have a real soft spot for people who say that they like experience anxiety. But I also am very careful about the words that we use when we are talking about this, because if you start to identify as a person who has anxiety, right? Like I have anxiety. That means that like I'm allowing it into my life, or I'm like it has control over me. And that's very different from I am currently experiencing anxiety, or I am currently experiencing anxious thoughts, right? And then when I can get to that second place, I'm currently experiencing anxious thoughts and I can be aware of that. Then I can be like, where do I feel that in my body? And so for me, my diaphragm starts shaking. Like it literally quivers, like right under my rib cage. I feel it like it just is quivering. And whenever I'm dealing with something that is highly emotionally charged for me, my diaphragm goes like this. It quivers. And I'm
Um,
like, it being aware of that's like, wow, that's
yes.
super fascinating that like that's what my body's doing. Like I'm having a physiological response to these emotional thoughts, but not identifying with anxiety in a way that lets it take over my life. And so,
Wow.
and it
Yeah.
matters, like the words that I use around it matter. And
Oh,
that was the class that I took where one of the most impactful courses that I have taken was the one where they really challenged us to look at our words. Look at your words. How are you using your words? And how do you feel when you say those things, right? So like if I say I have anxiety, how do I feel? Like like I feel ashamed. Like
mhm.
I feel vulnerable. I
Mhm.
feel weak. I feel powerless, right? When I say I have anxiety. If I say I'm currently experiencing anxious thoughts, how do I feel? Oh, I feel like I'm self-aware and I feel like
It's
uh,
like, oh,
it's current, right? Like it's happening right now and I can acknowledge it. So it's like um the whole idea of playing with your words is not gloss it over and make everything pretty and pink and flowery and pretend like things aren't real. So I'm not saying like I'm not anxious. No, 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 I'm not anxious, right? Like I can't, you can't talk yourself out of that. It's a matter of how do I make this statement continue to be true while also like somewhat on the positive side, or like where there's a ray of light in there somewhere.
or detachment, even without a charge. I think it's important to just disarm it, take the charge off of it. Doesn't matter, like to have choice, because it could be shit fucking crap. But the fact that you're not shit fucking crap. I'm the kind of person
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
I'm able to observe, like, I'm the kind of person who is really in touch with how I'm feeling right now, and I accept all the feels always. And I know that all of them are welcome and they will all pass and shift. And that's the only thing I can ever really know is that there will be shifts.
Mhm. Can I tell you something that was like really impactful for me too? And like coming out of this anxiety, uh, whatever it was, like the experience of it and like trying to navigate my way through it and like how do I continue to live my life and like live it in a way that feels good to me and that, where I'm in a good space. I decided that I wanted to start feeling emotion, not just feeling it, but like expressing it. Like I really wanted to feel it. And so like, this is so silly, but like I um I made a point, and this was a conscious thing that I did, and it was huge. I would look for other people finding and having success in their life, like in whatever capacity it was. Like I would see like somebody having success in their life, and I would like let myself feel all the joy for them. Like I would imagine what it would feel like to be them, to be in this scenario where you're achieving this thing that you've wanted to achieve and you're doing it and like good for you. And instead of being jealous, like so, and this is again, like this is where we've talked about this before, like when you come at something from a place of scarcity. So if I'm feeling internally a place like scarcity, I'm not getting what I want, then watching somebody else get what they want feels like a threat, or it feels like it's putting me down or somehow like I'm less than because she's getting what she wants and why can't I get what I want. And when I made a conscious decision to shift that internal thought for myself to be like, that's so cool for her. I know she worked so hard for that, and it's just amazing. I'm so happy, and I would like cry happy tears for the success of this other person. And like when I started doing that, first of all, is this like life-changing thing about like allowing myself to feel emotions and cry, even if they're happy tears, sad tears, like whatever. Like I let myself feel on purpose now, knowing that that goes against the grain of what I was taught. And you've heard that term unlearn. Like I want my shirt that just says unlearn. Like I just like there's so much that I feel like I want to unlearn, and shoving my emotions down is something I want to unlearn. And I would say at this point, I I don't know if it sounds too like if it's too harsh of a statement to say I have unlearned that, but I really think that I have unlearned that, which is
Amazing.
it's
Because I think
so
a lot underneath that is you unlearn and then you remember. Because the body, just as when you said the glutes want to fire, and Lawrence wrote this one time on a blurb, it's like the want of the body to find harmony. Because ultimately, underneath the unlearning of our programming is remembering what we always knew. We just forget. So it's, I think, a remembering.
that might come across as weird for some people who were brought up in like so at least with the emotional piece. So maybe with the physical piece, it's remembering how we used to move when we were carefree. Like that I totally get. But if I were to say like remembering how I was supposed to be, like mentally and emotionally, I that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And I think, nope, I don't want to remember that. And not that I'm like necessarily shoving it all down, but like I probably am. I do have some repressed memories from childhood. Um,
But
but
I
it,
mean, even
like,
before the trauma, like but you're right.
yeah,
It's some babies could even have been born with like, I guess, abuse before they had a chance to learn otherwise. Good point.
yeah. I would say there's some things like that I'd be like, I don't want to remember that. But remembering how to move, remembering how to be carefree, moving in a way that is carefree, that's the ticket, I think. I
And the
will say
emotions
too,
that come with it.
being a mom, it's like my daughter is turning 16 in about 2 weeks.
Oh,
That has been so good for me as well. She's such a good teacher. And I think that the key has been to not um to let her be who she's going to be. And I will say, so if I'm looking at stories, like if we're saying, where did you learn that? Because I find it like that, I feel like is an excellent question for like pick a belief, any belief, where did you learn that? And when you
Mhm.
can examine the source of where you learned it. So if you learned that the signals from your body are bad, where did you learn that? Oh, well, the head of my Mormon church taught me that. Well, is that something that you want to carry with you? Is that still serving you today? Because
And
like
then,
the source of
yeah,
where that came from is not super legit, right? So like when you break it down in that way, it makes it easier to let go of that very long held belief because the where you learned that is not valid, right?
but I think that's pivotal. And then where in your body can you notice that program and that belief shows up? Because
Mhm.
it's one thing to let it go in your head, but when it continues via a signal and sensation in the body, it's like using the brain to be, or using the body to be like, oh, okay, it's the shoulder tension right now. Okay, that's the church shit. Okay, can I go into the body? Because I feel like it's always going to show up in the tissue
Mhm.
first, and then we create a storyline about it.
Yep.
And then we can go into the tissue. Because from my perspective only, because I can only speak from my experience, is that the cognitive shit, as much as I can know, oh, it's the religion, oh, it's my parents that told me not to do this, as much as I can, it doesn't work. It doesn't last until I'm like, whoa, now my breathing is up in my chest and when I actually try to relax. Shit, can we go into that sensation?
Yeah.
And then it lets go of me.
How much do you journal or write down, right?
Oh, pendulate. Inconsistent. All things I do inconsistently, consistently and consistently.
My
Sometimes daily, sometimes every, yeah.
It was a huge so, and it may be something to try. And
Mm.
actually, if we want to do one, like it would be very vulnerable for you. But if you were into it, we could do like a session where you write out a story that is haunting you, right? So like I'll just share this to give an example of like how it went for me and how healing it was for me, and then you can like riff on it, think on it. But I went to this like it was like a mindset workshop, and I went because I was approaching it myself as a professional development opportunity because I'm like I'm a coach and I work with athletes, and I was aware that our mental state plays a role in our physical performance. This is a couple years ago, and I'm like I don't totally get it, but the more I learn about that, the better coach I'm going to be. So I'm going to go specifically because I wanted to be able to help other people. And what happened was I transformed my own life that weekend where I was like, oh my God, right? Like, but I didn't go with that intention. But
I
I
think
was
that's fucking beautiful. I think
was
we teach what we need to learn, and life gives us when the student is, yes. That's
yeah,
that's how you can tell it with Lawrence. The way
yeah,
he's moving in the, like, it's literally because he's felt it for himself. And that's where people sniff out authenticity. That's why we're doing the podcast together, because otherwise
yeah.
I wouldn't be doing a podcast with somebody.
Yeah, I felt this like because so it was really fascinating that I let myself like get fully immersed in this workshop, and I just like really like I went for it, and I'm not even sure why I felt like really safe in this environment, and I didn't even really know most of the people in the room, so this was not like here's this one-on-one private thing that I was doing with this mindset teacher. He flew in from Virginia, so it wasn't even like this is not someone that I know. I hardly knew anybody else in the room, and but anyway, he went through this whole spiel in the beginning, and then like the second piece of it was um this story that you tell yourself a lot, that is haunting you, the story that's holding you back, the story that you like default to whenever like you can't do something or like whatever, right? Like we all have those stories of like this is why I can't do that. And write it down. And I mean, I have my notebook and I'm just scribbling fiercely, and while I'm writing, I'm crying. Like it was just because I'd never like I'd never written it out the way that I did. But he was like, write it out conversationally, Not so different than a journal writing. It was like write it out conversationally as if you were writing a book, like as if you're actually telling the story, because that's how the story goes in your head. And so my story was around how I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was 25. And I was a triathlete at the time. Like I felt like I was super healthy. It just came completely out of the blue. I mean, I just like, what are you, insane. And the treatment was like it's fine, it's all fine, and I'm fine now. But at the time, and this was probably 24 years ago now, it was 1999, it's 25 years ago. The doctor said to me, um, that we figured out these treatments, but um, there's a possibility that 20 years from now you'll have some negative side effects, like that, you'll get breast cancer, you'll have thyroid cancer, you'll have, just as like long-term side effects from the treatment that we're going to give you now. And then when he explained it, he's like, but what we need to do is treat the problem that we have right now, and then if any of those problems come up later, we'll deal with them then, but like we have to deal with this problem that is in front of us immediately. And I was like, yep, okay, that's fine. Right. So like I went through the whole thing. It was all fine. I got through it within a year or two. I'm back doing triathlon. I did like, I don't know, 16 more Ironmans. Like I am whatever I was trying to prove. That's another thing we can get into another day.
Holy shit.
But what happened was, I'm not kidding you, 20 years later, like almost to the day. So like I would mark that anniversary of like May 5th is when I was diagnosed with cancer. It's like May 5th, my 1 year anniversary, May 5th, my 2nd year anniversary, May 5th, it's been 5 years now, right? So like on the 20th year, like that is when my anxiety like went into full panic mode, right? Like that's when I ended up in the ER. Like that's when I can't breathe. That's when I can't. And it had really been haunting me because what the doctor said was these treatments might have this impact later, right? What I heard was 20 years from now, you're going to have to go through all this again. Like 20 years from now, this is coming back. And so at 18 years, it was fine because we hadn't hit 20 yet. And when we hit 20, right, this story that I had been living with for 20 years comes back up. And I go in, now I'm like in the doctor's office all the time and like, check it, doctor. I'm sure there's something wrong with me. I know there's something wrong with me. And now I'm like looking for signs in my body. I'm looking for anything that's not perfect. Meanwhile, I'm still competing at like a pretty high level, but like it wasn't as good as it was before. So, I have this. Anyway, I wrote the whole thing out. And when then the instructor of the course, he had me read it out loud in front of everyone in the class, which was a super vulnerable thing to do. And I'm doing that. My diaphragm's just like shaking like mad. And then he had me read it several times. And in the third reading, he had me insert a deep, full breath after every sentence. So, like, I would read a sentence, full breath, read a sentence, full breath. And, like, oh my God, that was like the release. And I was able to see the whole story so much more clearly that, like, this is just a story. Like, what did the doctor actually say? Right? He said, maybe. The current doctors are saying they find nothing wrong, like I'm fine. So I was able to like see the whole thing so much more clearly once the words were written down on paper and I read it out loud with breath. That was the key part, was like, because I could pick out the sentence. It's like that was the sentence. And the relief that happened, like like the letting go of that and the freedom that it brought to get an objective look on the story that I was telling myself. Because that was the thing, like other mindset teachers had told me stuff like, well, figure out how it isn't true. And I'm like, no, it is true, right? Like I had cancer. He said that. I'm 20 years later, right? You know what I mean? It's like if I'm just looking for like where's a hole in the story, then there was nothing about it that wasn't true. The part about it that was eating at me was my imagined future that wasn't even my actual life. And it was like writing it down was the part that was transformational. And as soon as I did that, I was like, I have to learn this method. I have to get certified in this method. Teach me more. I want to know it all. And so when I write on my Instagram stories to translate this, when I'm looking at like the words that people are writing and it's like translate this, it's because when like we can make a statement so much more powerful by just switching out a couple of words and learning like what to look for. And like there are big categories of ways that we use words that it's like it's not serving us at all to talk like that, to think like that, none of that is serving us. So all of that has been incredibly impactful for me, giant life changing. And so I think when you take that, when you take like, I'm aware of the words that I use, I'm aware of the story that I'm telling myself, I'm aware of how I'm breathing, and now I'm on my posterior chain. I have access to my posterior chain because I'm flowing the rope every day, comfortable in my own skin.
Holy shit.
So
I
those are
don't,
and I would say though, it took walking through that fire, right? Like had I not been vulnerable and done that whole process, I might likely still be stuck there, like still looking for a sign that I'm not healthy.
my brain, in lieu, I don't even know how to say that, of the Huberman 90 minutes is like, I really want to go ape shit on something that you just lit in me, but I would love to save it for another time because literally there's something that you just ticked, but it's a massive bite to chew that I want to describe to you, if possible, another time.
Yeah, do it. But can you just give me like give me a cue, give me like a phrase that we can write down that so we remember, so you're not like, oh my God, I totally forgot. It was so important and I forgot. Like, can you just give me a phrase that will trigger
Yeah.
your memory?
Hmm. Impending doom.
Yeah, I think that's where it comes from, isn't it? Like impending doom, like we're looking for something to crash.
Well, it's almost like what Taylor said about in that Jan Frodeno. I really enjoyed, and it's playing a note of what we're doing right now. Her talk and walk with Jan Frodeno. I don't know if you watched that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, I'm going to pull the bucket on my own head before someone else does. Same thing. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to do all of the things to self-sabotage because I'd rather have that feeling now than at some unknown date, lava's going to fall on my face. So I'm going to pull it on myself now and prepare myself for what's impending doom. And that's what the tissues, it's funny. I have a client who has chronic ankle rolling in his heritage, in his family. His structural bones have formed in such a way where he's protecting his entire body from rolling his ankles. His skeleton has shifted. Maybe not. What I'm observing is a storyline of filling in two bookends where I can notice that there's a shift in this skeleton, and I'm like, I feel like it's chronic slow protection of something that is probably better off that you actually roll your ankle than the compensatory movement strategy you have formed.
Yeah, and those beliefs are so hard. Like I feel like that storyline of it's genetic, boy, that's a hard one to break, right? And it's like, well, maybe it was learned, right? And it's not in like trauma does pass down. Like I get that. But it's not like there's nothing we can do about it now. Like, oh, I'm just like this is what it is for me and I don't have a choice. Like I don't subscribe to that at all. But
And it's like, that's it. Some people just, I think that's where the art comes. And I think that's where the who we are comes because I think it takes a certain kind of invitation that people are open to. Someone might be like, meditation might be helpful, and delivery is the art. If someone, right, like honestly, like this community via Lawrence if someone told me to breathe when I first woke up in the morning and it wasn't at a place like if it was a yogi waving a feather and I'm a triathlete, okay, not happening. But if it's Lawrence that's describing his athletes who are actually the strongest, most powerful, not even athletes, athletes, first humans, and then athletes because of the human, I gravitate towards breathing. And I use my mind because I'm like, okay, I know this is good for me. And then I download the feeling and trust that that feeling is actually really soothing. Whereas before, the tension response was soothing because it's all I learned and what was familiar and safe. And now I'm like, and now it's fun, right? Like it's a funny, 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 funny delivery method. And that's again the art. Because I mean, 40 burpees, 100 burpees was my norm.
And now the norm is like, I'm humming in the morning.
Right. And the only way, like people sniff it out at me. My friend's like, who are you now? I'm like, oh, I really don't even know. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, let's end the conversation there. And
Yeah, my brain is like, this was perfect. I think this is a good amount. And let's like to be continued this. I was actually, you know what? If you didn't say that right now, I was gonna say you want to continue, but take the video off and do our sacral release on a rolling pin. I'm not even kidding. I'm like, I'm distracted and I know that that would help me. I don't know about you. Does that help you? Because I have my rolling pin right here.
100% I do it almost every day.
Same. It helps me sometimes. I was actually thinking about that, like to have the video off or